Day 1303 of the war. The EU has seriously considered confiscating Russian assets in favor of Ukraine. Now the question is how this plan should look like, only not like confiscation. This action can solve a lot of problems at once. First, there will be serious resources to support Ukraine for several more years. Second, dictators will get a direct lessons that military aggression has heavy financial consequences. Let's hope this isn't just nonsense. This time, that kind of. Hope has its effect. In a minute I'll tell you why. Vladimir Solovyov is working as a drone operator for Ukrainian Armed Forces, one of the most humiliating investigations recently. A poorly blurred toilet band, Solovyov's video propaganda revealed the location of the base of the secret and most effective unit of Russian army drone operators, Rubikon. It is said. The investigation, Freedom Radio, thanks Solovyov for his service, someone else among their own, someone else's. Ukraine strikes Russian air defenses with an anti-aircraft missile system. Meanwhile, Russian air traffic was covered with mold. The Russian army suffered the worst week on the front line since April. The occupied area was 38 square kilometers. The main problem remains the southern operational zone, but hope for improvement is still there due to the change in the leadership of Ukraine's defense forces. At the same time, Russian attacks are not decreasing, they are seriously growing. Russian military sincerely sympathizes with signing contracts and accuses their own command of corruption and theft. Meanwhile, fundraising of Z-volunteers for these very soldiers continues to decline, and Ukrainian forces are forced to abandon their positions. Even Channel Millions openly talk about the problem, which can't help but rejoice. This and much more in today's emphasized fresh report, which you can support with your likes, comments, and subscriptions to the channel. All these actions help the advance of the video, especially your subscriptions on YouTube. This is where the YouTube algorithm points. When he sees that people are starting to subscribe after the video comes out or during watching it, he's like, the video is great, I'll show it to more people. So thank you to everyone subscribing and hitting the like and comment button. It also helps the channel promote. The EU has started preparing a mechanism for supplying most of Russia's frozen assets. Within the reporting loan system, Russian assets that the EU has started discussing will include a total of 170 billion euros frozen in Europe, Financial Times reported. Russia will be able to return them only if it agrees to pay preparations. Financial Times reported this initiative for the first time on a Saturday. The proposed mechanism should look following: frozen Euroclear funds buyed from the EU's non-profit organization, and these funds are handed over to Kiev. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, last week reported that compensation loans will only be returned if Russia agrees to compensate Kiev for the damage from the invasion. This scheme allows Kiev to transfer frozen Russian assets without their formal withdrawal. From the Financial Times publication, it became clear on Wednesday how much Russian money Europe plans to use to help Ukraine. As the paper, about financial tools for 170 billion euros and 194 billion euros raised by Euroclerk have already been extinguished and is now being listed as the money remnants on the accounts, two sources familiar with the situation reported. Brussels has intensified its work on the proposal against the fact that the prospects of a peace settlement remain blurred. Russia continues to hold maximalist goals in Ukraine. The Trump administration does not show willingness to strengthen Europe or increase economic pressure on Moscow or military aid to Kiev, writes the Financial Times. Washington is also pushing allies toward using Russian assets rather than gaining profits from them, which last year already went to Ukraine's loan of 50 billion euros, in a message from the US. Sent out by the large Seven country and at the behest of the Financial Times, it is said G7 should consider confiscating or redeploying the main capital of Russian sovereign assets to fund Ukraine's defense. Foundations in Denmark this week intend to discuss the idea of reporting loans. The Euro Commission plan aims to bypass refutations from several countries, particularly Belgium, Germany, and France, fearing that confiscating main capital, not just percent, would go beyond the law or disrupt European trust in reserve currency, according to Financial Times. Of course, it should be noted that under the current dollar, when euros remain one of Europe's strongest currency, space for maneuver is much higher, much wider. Foreigners need money, there are not many options, said a German official familiar with EU plans. While key elements and schemes remain an object of absurdity, writes Financial Times, risk must be taken teamically, said von der Leyen during her recent statement, referring to Belgium's concern about possible responsibility in case of criminal appeal from Russia. And here comes the most important shift, making people think this isn't an empty conversation. In the publication, Financial Times notes that Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, whose diplomatic advisor Günther Zotter, spoke at a conference in Kiev and stated that the issue of frozen assets is moving, though slow, writes Financial Times. Germany used to be one of the three main opponents of the idea of an additional capture of funds from the EU, but now, according to Merz, it is impossible. Germany accuses the EU of using Russian frozen assets along with France and Belgium, arguing it exposes existing legislation and undermining EU reserves. But now, Germany, which has always been cautious, has spoken to supporters of maximizing payments from frozen assets, especially given the restriction of national budgets and the exhaustion of the opportunity for the EU to give its own loans. This creates space for braver decisions on frozen assets.
Раньше времени, конечно, радоваться не стоит. В Европе все еще есть Орбан и Фица, а также опасения у двух стран, Франции и Бельгии, что такое решение ударит по инвестиционному климату в Европе. Но подвижки серьезные. В очередной раз отмечу, что хоть и не являюсь экономистом, но решение об изъятии российских активов не повлияет на инвестиционную привлекательность, потому что сам факт их заморозки уже показал, что деньги, хранящиеся в Европе, не находятся в абсолютной неприкосновенности.
And everyone who could have been scared of that has already been scared. I explain it with my fingers how I understand it. The European Union and the countries against it care about the fact that if Russian assets are taken, other potential investors in the European economy and those who want to place money in Europe will see that their funds are not protected. Can take them for political reasons at any time. That's why they won't spend their money, whether it's Saudi Arabia or China or anyone else. According to some countries, these risks could potentially lead to military clashes or the fall of the European Union. But in my view, these risks are already there because no matter whether you're taking their assets or frozen them, if you let other people's money go for political reasons, anything that could happen already happened. This risk is already there, judging by the people who are willing to give it. Say Russian funds have been frozen since, 2022? Now it's 2025. 3 years, you don't have any conditional funds. You gave the money to the bank and the bank says, look man, we aren't taking your money yet, we keep discussing it, but at the same time we're frozen them so you don't have access to them. And the percent of this money that we are putting in, the money you're saving, we are putting in, we will give it to someone else, the person you attacked. That is, you still understand that your money is not protected. They have already been frozen with them already. Well, in fact, the percent from the capital body is in fact the same money. Well, that is because the money is working, the asset is working, there is inflation, their value is decreasing, and in fact, the money earned from these money also compensates for inflation and gives you some profits. That is, they use your money, and what I'm talking about is not that it's wrong. Of course it's right. Any aggressor must know that he will bear financial responsibility for what he does, and that all these risks are already taken into account. That is I don't know. China sees that, aha, Russian money is frozen, so mine can freeze. That is, he still makes a decision already taking into account these risks. And taking these assets or not taking these assets seriously will not change this risk. Of course, taking assets is a more radical measure than frozen, but nevertheless, when you have 4 banks in front of you, and you're like, this one's cool, but he might freeze my assets and 3 others won't freeze them. You'll go for 3 others if it matters to you, if you plan to attack someone. And it matters whether assets are just being frozen or being frozen. In my view, this next step seriously doesn't affect you. But that's just my opinion. I'm not an economist, and I hope European leaders will draw the same conclusion. This decision itself will increase the chance of reaching the end of the war, as it's not paradoxical. This decision may be made to help Ukraine more and provide support and stable support for Ukraine for several years ahead, because 70 billion euros is a large amount that will cover 2 to 3 years of war for Ukraine. But the fact that these money will allow Ukraine to stay out longer, as it is not paradoxically, will bring the end of the war, because Putin's bet is literally to cross Ukraine and the West. That is, the bet that Ukraine will run out of financial, human, military resources, and that an additional 100 170 billion euros will appear in support for Kiev. They will hit hard on Putin's plans and give him the understanding that, yes, Ukraine has resources and will last long. Let's hope that the European bureaucrats really wake up and pull their heads out of their asses. But of course, we are preparing for the worst on our own, as always, because from the idea to its implementation and the overcoming of all difficulties is always a very long path, especially if we are. Unfortunately, talking about Europe, the radar complex was damaged during the UAV attack in the Voronezh region. On the evening of September 16, the drone of Ukrainian Armed Forces detonated and damaged the antenna of the Sopka 2 radar complex, Astra found. This happened near the village of Garmashivka, in the Kantamirivka district of the region, more than 170 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Governor of the Voronezh region, Pavel Gusev, confirmed the attack of UAVs and stated that the drone was destroyed. The Russian Ministry of Defense also reported the destruction of one UAV over the Voronezh region. The RLK Sopka 2 drone is designed to be used as radar control of the airspace. In turn, researcher Jim Bob found that NASA satellites recorded thermal fire signals in the area of the S-300 and S-400 launchers near the Saratov non-oil refinery. Analyst Igor Levin drew attention to this post. The Ukrainian General Staff reported the destruction of this enterprise on the night of September 15-16. Satellite systems located close to its territory. An analyst AS-22 identified the complex as K96L6E, suggesting it was protected by the S-400 system. Tank-damaged stations and air defense systems next to it remain unknown. Perhaps new satellites will show up. Hopefully, Igor Levin and I hope so too. Furthermore, Russian airline passengers fell for the first time since 2022. They carried 50 million passengers in the first half of 2025, and in the summer period, 33.1 million, reported head of Russian aviation Dmitry Yedrov at a meeting with Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. This indicates the first drop in Russian aviation passengers since 2022, according to the agency's analysis. Yedrov stated Mishustin that in June-August aviation carried 25.5 million passengers domestic and 7.6 million. Internationally, this year we faced another challenge: short-term flight restrictions imposed in Moscow's Pulkovo airfield and other cities of our country. He added, referring to actions being developed within the plan which has increased interaction level for alternative transport types. The data given to the head of the Russian Air Force points to the drop in passengers compared to last year. In comparison with the first half-year agreement of 2024, the drop was 0.4%. Then it was reduced to 51 million passengers. In comparison with the summer period of last year, when it was reduced to 34.8 million passengers, the number of passengers reduced to 4.9%. Then the data were conducted separately, in June, July, and August. Judging by the statement of Yardov in the Russian Air Force, the drop in transports, including collapses at airports, the drone attacks which became the regular ones this year. Another explanation of the passenger flow decrease could be a slowdown in the Russian economy. In any case, both are consequences of the war, and until the war is not over, these consequences for Russia will increase in cost and influence on society. Before we move on, I remind you that you can support this video not only with your likes, comments, and subscriptions to the channel, which is insanely important, but also with the financial side. You can do this on Patreon, the link is in the description. This is a service for current payments, for regular support for the channel. Subscribe to a certain level of support, get all sorts of bonuses. Unfortunately, there are not very many of them yet, and I still do not manage to conduct regular streams for patrons, but I still hope that it will work out. I still have full resolution. I have selected propaganda videos, accumulation of films, absolutely, which I want to watch together with the patrons, and I hope that at least at this moment. Yes, before I said we will do it, now I say I hope, because the hell knows, we can watch them at least this month with you, with those who support this financial channel, providing independence and continued existence. Well, you can also buy an NVPN, a tool to bypass blockages that allow you to bypass blockages. Use YouTube at a normal speed and in a normal quality. Use Twitter, Instagram, call on Telegram and WhatsApp, including your family and loved ones. Well, in general, it is normal to use the internet, not the cutouts. That Vladimir Putin is trying to leave for you instead of the internet. If you want to decide for yourself what to watch, listen, and read, then buy NVPN VPN by the link in the description. In Russia, it is still legal to buy VPNs and use them. Well, we move on. Russia continues striking Ukrainian railway infrastructure. Yesterday, Russian forces struck an energy substation near the railway department. Results indicate delay in passenger trains to Odessa and Dnipropetrovsk for 3-4 hours. Part of the delay is due to changed routes. 20 refineries have already been started. As for international clashes, particularly in Helmy Peremyshla, we're already in contact with dispatch teams of foreign railway transports and coordinating interceptions, waiting for trains and accelerated border control, writes Dmitry Kamensky. Head of the company Kolzalzhnika Oleksandr Pertsovsky on the night of Wednesday reported a complex strike on railway infrastructure again. Another night, another complex attack on a railway as it would cause delays in trains to the Dnipro direction. Reservoirs are ready, locomotives and brigades are leaving. They'll help reduce delays and traditionally bring everyone back, wrote the head of the company Kolzalzhnika Oleksandr Pertsovsky on Facebook. Pertsovsky didn't specify where the strike was this time. On Thursday, he told Ukraine's agency Form that Russia has started a wave of massive strikes on Ukraine's railway infrastructure, including key stations. Shaheds are massively attacking our key stations, examples of attacks on the Lysovaya, Sinelnikov, and Kazyatin stations, i.e., they are hitting key stations across the country, Pertsovsky said. He added that Russians are trying to strike electric stations, depots, and train stations, attempting to completely destroy the unit. During a meeting, drone expert Sergei Flash-Byskresnov spoke about a Shahed version of a jet-powered Shahed, also known as the Gerasimov 3, which is increasingly seen and shot over Ukraine. I can say, he writes, that this type of Shahed does not look like Iranian products, says Flash. This is some kind of mix of a normal Shahed and a jet-powered one. The engine is, of course, Chinese, and the combat part is just the normal Shahed. The jet-powered Shahed has no advantages other than high speed, and it didn't seem that easy. The jet-powered Shahed can fly 500 kilometers per hour, but he spends so quickly to spend that money on drone operations. That's the problem. That's why all jet-powered Shaheds can fly at speed 280-330, but that's enough to block our mobile fire units and anti-aircraft drones. That's why the number of jet-powered Shaheds and their operations will depend only on the successes of our anti-aircraft drones against ordinary Shaheds. Jet-powered drones are still more expensive than simple ones, and Russians will not hurry to buy them, Flash believes, without a reason. A strong increase in speed involves a strong fuel expense, and that increase in speed that exists to have enough fuel to reach the target doesn't exactly exceed a normal Shahed. Yes, at the moment it's enough to complicate the life of mobile fire groups, but I hope the counterattack will be quite rapid, although probably partially already there, since they've been shot down after all. Well, my favorite topic for today's report is how Solovyov destroyed the toilet, or rather, how Solovyov destroyed Rubikon. In short, how the toilets of Solovyov were destroyed by Rubikon. The poorly blurred toilet, as reported by propagandist Solovyov, opened the location of the base of the secret drone unit of the Russian army Rubikon. This is stated in the investigation of the radio, Freedom. The most hype unit of the Russian army right now is Rubikon, even not a unit, but a vertical structure that is doing UAVs. Development of tests, training operators' own units on the front. Rubikon, which appeared a little more than a year ago, Russia is largely responsible for the success of the Kursk operation. The summer advance in the Donetsk region is also Rubikon, which has learned no worse than Ukrainian UAVs to isolate areas of the battlefield, hunt operators of the UAV enemy, and cut logistics. This isn't fantasy, it's a collective assessment by Ukrainian military and Western experts. At the same time, almost nothing was known about Rubikon until now. It was supposedly created under the personal initiative of Defense Minister Belousov. That's it. A secret center is a formula being used by official Russian media when they write about Rubikon. Analysts found out where this secret center was and who heads it. A classic ascent, poorly blurred images of toilets in Vladimir Solovyov's propaganda segment, columned inflatable figures for drone racing visible through the camouflage net, and random people in the frame. An old joke that everything important needs to be hidden in a clear place. Maybe that's the case, or the logistics are convenient, or the already deployed air defense, but Rubicon's headquarters is located in one of the exhibition pavilions, Patriot Park. Yes, right here in the hall, they are holding the motor exhibition, Vesna 25, and the girls and animators are dancing on the stage while the newcomers are training to control the camouflage net with FPV drones. Drinks with operators go to the front with parking at the cluster military-industrial complex, as if they were moving away directly from the DNH pavilion. An important find: inside the Russian army, Rubicon oversees the management of promising interindustrial and special projects. A low-profile army structure which at the same time actively participated in negotiations with Iran, perhaps responsible for Shaheds and all relative effective Russian Ministry of Defense projects related to modern technologies. Separately, besides the investigation, I'll say from myself, I understand you're unlikely to believe me about Russian soldiers in particular, but let's say I can't show proof. Rubicon's popularity has the opposite side. It has become goal number one for many units, and Rubicon has big problems with losses. Hits are very often made, of which no one reports publicly. In circles close to Rubicon, the term group grave has already been nicknamed for the unit, and you can find immediate confirmation of what I'm talking about. If you go to the resources related to Rubicon, you will see in their reports that the equipment hit by them has become less than, well, once in 3- in their video reports. Look at the Z channels. Here's the thing: the number of Rubicon soldiers has become much less, and thank God, what's happening to them has already crawled through the troops. In short, I'm sorry I can't tell you the details, unfortunately, and I don't like it when speakers make it this mysterious and secretive, but here, by the way, since they talked about Rubicon, it's hard on them now. And thank God it's hard. And why did they do it this way? Well, they'll tell you later, and it won't be me. In any case, thank you, Vladimir Solovyov, for the introduction to the secret center of Rubicon. We look forward to strikes on the Patriot Park and specifically on Rubicon. Of course, the Russian army is used not only for modern technologies. In the 225th Separate Assault Regiment of Ukrainian Armed Forces, they told about a curious find at the Russian ammunition warehouse. These detonators were found in the Russian ammunition warehouse, which was spotted by scouts from the tour. They write in the regiment's press service and provide the following photo. At first glance, these are simply trophies aimed at their producers. However, these marks have made us go deep into history, they write. On September 17, 1939, the Soviet Union grossly attacked Poland, which had already been significantly defeated by battles with Wehrmacht. This was not the only case of cooperation between the two totalitarian regimes. On August 39, Germany and the USSR signed a commercial agreement, which they added in February 1940. Through these agreements, the Soviet Union received military equipment and material, particularly detonators for shells marked with swastikas. Some of the detonators back then remained in Russian stores. Nazi weapons are still used to kill people. Hitler's and Stalin's regimes disappeared and Putin came in their place. The names are different, but the essence is the same. Russian authorities feed their people with nonsense about fighting fascism, though it is in reality a fascist state, they write, demonstrating these detonators literally with a Nazi symbol. Everywhere but the most harshly beaten is right there. At the same time, the commander shouts, "Thank you, Commander," and talks about the former Ukrainian POWs in the Mordovia penal colony. In this penal colony, as they say, and with the return of 5 more soldiers, it was the hardest for Ukrainians. In Russia, the Mordovia penal colony, as the place with the cruel treatment of prisoners for clarifying torture in penal colony, has appeared over the past 10 years in principle. But judging by the stories of Ukrainian prisoners, their Russian torture tried systematic, including for their own entertainment. They are beaten and laughed at, and one of the surviving soldiers says it is high profile. They were forced to stand for 16 hours a day and sing the national anthem 10 times a day. They were beaten with it. Pipeline from the military-industrial unit to being slit their skin. They were hit with an electric shocker for complaining about health. They were fed to dogs. All this is just part of the arsenal of torture that colony employees tried to break for Ukrainians. You can read more about this in the new investigation of the Russian military service, and I'm again sending a message that all units will receive deserved punishment in the form of a fair trial, or at least a self-propelled vehicle. In Russia, there is literally a torture system at the Gestapo level, and this is confirmed by UN reports and by testimonies from those who passed these torture cases and by testimonies from a medical investigation returning from Ukrainian POWs. For Russia, it's a natural, tortured, targeted system toward Ukrainian POWs. I won't say it violates all possible or impossible convictions, but the awareness that inside Russia there is officially and practically a Gestapo that not only covers for the authorities, but that is initiated. The authorities, this awareness must reach everyone. Everyone should ask themselves a question, even if they support Putin in the destruction of Ukraine, to say, what if we have a Gestapo? Maybe I'm still wrong, maybe my views, my decisions, my actions turned wrong. Of course, I do not appeal to these prisoners who are doing all this. Their only duty is to die like dogs. And if their own methods will be applied to them, I do not approve of it, but I will not resist much, because in my opinion, the person who disrupted the international conventions, the person who disrupted the right of another person, is themselves deprived of providing these rights. The Russian military is leaving its positions in the Sumskaya Oblast. The video of September 15 was published on the same 225th Separate Assault Regiment of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. It shows how a group of servicemen of the Russian Armed Forces are moving to the side of the border with Russia in the area of the village of Konstantinovka. Sumskaya Oblast writes in the channel Pepel Kursk, which geolocated this video. Also, the footage shows the troops trying to get to Russian territory, sail through the Senya River, where they get attacked by FPV drones. Honestly, the mystery of the 225th Regiment appears everywhere, and at Pokrovskoye and Sumskoye, hopefully, the Mavics gathered with us are helping. Soon, by the way, we will be helping them again. They are apparently in line after the fundraising, so 225th fans prepare. Well, prepare your bags, as they say. Ascent researcher, nicknamed Klemen Malin, Skeptics, assessments the statement of encirclement of Russian units in the area of the salient Russian breakthrough on Dobropillya, the so-called Dobropillya pit, which, as I said, we will have to return again. In fact, according to his assessment, after the breakthrough blocking became known and Ukrainian counterattacks, no reliable information from this participate did not come, and in fact even the command of the sides reliable does not know what is happening there. It is possible to record Ukrainian counterattacks only on traces of Russian airstrikes on advancing units on satellite images. An analyst notes that recently the Russian armed forces bombed only a small zone in this sector, and concludes that it is either under Russian control or located in a gray zone. He also doubts that local encirclements have any effect, as supply is carried out using drones, but notes that the advantage overall is with the Ukrainian side, which is using the moment to make gaps in fortifications on the so-called New Donbass line, which the Russians managed to take advantage of during the so-called breakthrough. So, researcher, it's not that he denies the rapid encirclementing of Russian troops, but rather says that it impacts much less in modern warfare than before. Whether it's true or not, his words matter, but full defense supplies inside the encirclementing with modern drones are still not enough, especially since Russia has big problems with big drones like the vampire woman Yaga. And let's be honest, a boiler is beautiful. That's why in this war both countries are constantly talking about whether a boiler can be formed here or there. The point is, it rarely turns out, but in this particular situation there are all chances. We wish the Ukrainian fighters good luck. The fresh update of the deep state map indicates that Russian forces have expanded the control zone in Kupyansk, although not as much as Z-channels claim, and in the neighboring Golubovka. Another pipeline operation may have helped, with the help of which the Russians passed through shrapnel without threatening Ukrainian drones. Kupyansk Oboronai's poor preparation, written specifically by a Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel Officer. Either way, Kupyansk remains a dangerous part of the front, along with the Lemensk and South Donetsk directions. In the south, Russian forces also have certain successes. In deep state, the Russian advance is recorded near Novovanovka in Zaporizhia region. Investigative Klemen Malin also detailed the situation in the southern operational zone, citing his thread in the Infactum channel's retort. Ukraine's southern front has effectively remained stable since 2022, when the Russian defense forces stopped 4 villages: Kamensk, Orkovo, Goraipal, and Velika Novoselka. Therefore, Ukrainians used up time to draw 2 massive defensive lines in the rear, simultaneously mining the front line. These fortifications are impressive, but with the appearance of drones, their value has significantly declined. Everything changed since the end of 2024. The South Donetsk front has partially collapsed. Paul Gledar, Kurakovo, and Velika Novoselka took over. Since then, the Russian army has been moving northward to cross Mokra and Yala rivers, and then westward, attempting to bypass Ukrainian defenses. To understand well what is happening there, we need a logistics map. This map outlines 4 cities and roads that connect them. On the southern front, there are 2 defensive lines located in the rear of prefrontal cities, 4 main links on 2 routes, eastern and western, Pokrovsk and Novonikolivka on route N15, and southward there is Gyulipol and Orkiv. The Russian army is advancing northeastward, parallel to the N15 highway, but carefully avoiding Gavrilovka, where 2 rivers and the defensive line, a swamp, is guaranteed. The offensive from the south is unlikely, despite numerous attempts. Currently, the main Russian multiple is headed toward the Gulay-Pokrovsk defensive line. First, it is necessary to cross a small river and take the Poltavka. The researcher also provides a topographic map, i.e., the map on which the terrain is marked. The front line is marked in black and the key heights are in blue. Russia aims to bypass fortifications both on the front and in the rear, capturing Pokrovsk and advancing along the road to Zaporizhia. There is certain hope for an improvement in the situation in this sector, in particular, with the change of the leadership of the 17th and 20th Corpses of Ukrainian Armed Forces, which I told you about yesterday. And if it was possible, the Sarkistovskis commented on the deep state and added this news. There is good news also in the field of the 20th Army Corps, that is, the change of the commanders of the 31st Separate Mechanized Brigade into one of the co-founded unit, the 47th OMBR. He is, to be honest, a legend. The advance of Russian soldiers in Ukraine continues to slow down. Over the past week, they captured only 38 square kilometers, roughly corresponding to the area of Zelenograd, according to the data of the close Ukrainian Defense Ministry and the Deep State Project, analyzed by the agency. In reality, they just captured a bit more due to Ukrainian counterattacks, and the total area of the occupied territory has increased precisely by these very 38 square kilometers. The last time this pace was advanced was a week from August 21 to April 27. The agency then describes a strategic situation that in principle has not changed much since. As I told you about the failure of the Russian summer offensive, it will not be necessary to repeat, especially since some of the trends that I drew then only intensified. The Russian military captured the southern Donetsk region in just 1 week, where they advance into Dnipropetrovsk region. There, according to Deep State, 40 square kilometers have been controlled by the Russian army. Also, the Ukrainian project recorded the advance of the Russian troops in the Limanovka district. The advance took place in Sumy in the northeast of Donetsk region and around Kupyansk, east of Kharkiv region, where roughly 9 square kilometers were controlled. According to Deep State, Ukrainian forces managed to advance a few sectors in Ukrainian forces. Pokrovsk, Kostiantynivka, and Ukrainian troops managed to retreat just over 3 square meters and 7 more and returned to Sumy region. The maximum depth of 38 square kilometers was from 21 to 27 April. After that, the Russian army did not advance less than 45 square kilometers per week. In just the first half of September, Russian forces captured 102 square kilometers, which is less than the average weekly advance speed during a summer offensive square kilometers in 7 days. The Ukrainian army managed to stabilize the situation in almost all directions, except for Limansk and south of Donetsk, said agency analyst Kirill Mikhailov. According to him, this will help in particular an effective counterattack of assault units in the Sumy region. Considering the pace of advance, the Russian army can be explained by the fact that the Russian military command misjudged the number of forces needed to capture Pokrovsk and Mionorad, said agency and experts from the intelligence team's investigation group. And to such an extent, he said, the units in the Sumy region had to be redeployed, which immediately improved the situation, added the analyst. The main forces of the Russian army, which were deployed in the Donetsk region, have not yet been used, said agency analyst Yan Matveev. In Pokrovsk, he estimated the ongoing large combat without advance. According to Kirill Mikhailov, there are signs that the Russian command may try to break the situation in this area with a strike from Pokrovsk to Konstantinovka. Focusing on the VDV group and Marines, we'll keep watching, but first let me note that they have already tried it. There have been a few attacks on the Sumy direction, and there have been some VDV attacks just because sorry, General Akhmedov always brings up these emotions. Just because they are leading, General Akhmedov started. Using a classic Akhmedov tactic to just sit down at an armored car and go, and they were all spread out there just like nothing happened. Again, is it funny? Because the war is still ongoing and they are still killing troops. And so on, but of course, from the point of view of repeated madness, General Akhmedov and the Russian VDV, Marpik, simply adore repeating the same thing, hopefully, for a different result. It's easy to assume that the next news is related to the previous one about the failure of the Russian army on the front. And believe it or not, the head of the general staff didn't show up near Putin on the exercises in West 2025. The head of the general staff, Vladimir Gerasimov, was not present at the final type of these exercises in Nizhny Novgorod region, which was visited by Vladimir Putin. The personnel of the official chronic of the Kremlin and the report of a journalist from the Kremlin regiment, Andriy Kalesnikov, is also present. After his appointment as head of the general staff, Gerasimov always appeared next to the president on maneuver, which is carried out once every 4 years. Kalesnikov reported that he was looking for everything in the eyes of the head of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, But no, he was not in these exercises. The general staff therefore represented the head of the ground forces, General Andriy Mordovich, added Kolesnikov. Later, the absence of Gerasimov was commented on by the President Dmitry Peskov. He stated that a special military operation was underway, and the general coordination of this operation, of course, was carried out by the head of the general staff. The formal explanation of Peskov makes sense. In September 2022, Gerasimov was present with Shaheds and Putin at the exercises Vostok 22, although back then there were every reason to send him to a standoff against the backdrop of a catastrophe in the east of Kharkov Oblast. But back then, Gerasimov had not yet headed the personally unified Russian military group in Ukraine. He took that position only in January 2023, replacing Sergei Surovikin. For its part, I note that if Gerasimov really commands the SVO so closely that he can't even step down from training, then this is undoubtedly good news for Ukraine, as well as explains the decline in the pace of the Russian offensive. I believe that not a single aspect of conducting combat actions should be bypassed by much attention of Comrade Gerasimov, this modern-day colonel genius. However, we'll discuss these exercises separately. They turned out to be quite funny, even the Z channels aren't entirely clear. But Gerasimov is interesting, and everyone pays attention to the question, who's next to Putin and who's not. This is called guessing by circle, an old Soviet habit, because usually the position of a certain character in a hierarchy near the dictator is determined by the person at the parade next to him and how far away he is from him. Here, as you can see, Gerasimov has no training at all. And of course, Gerasimov is the last one left in the leadership of the Defense Ministry after Shakur's withdrawal, replacing him with Belousov. He's, I think, the only one left from the Shegub group, the only one not sitting there. Will Gerasimov sit down? Will he be removed in the near future? For the failure of his summer offensive and, in principle, for the absence of any noticeable successes in the war over 3.5 years, the question is open. But of course, I hope he won't be dismissed. Gerasimov is a wonderful person and commander, even though, if we speak frankly, without obstacles. Well, the same Valery Zaluzhny very high evaluated Gerasimov as the military chief. And of course, we say that Gerasimov has brought the Russian army to this state it is in right now, to the military position it is in right now. Yes, but we don't know what would have happened if something had happened. Things would have been even worse, even though they didn't leave Sarovik and Kherson, for example. General Armageddon, so to speak, has powerful Armageddon, so the question is open. Well, that is, can you imagine if Gerasimov were truly a great head of the general staff but such a terrible Russian army with all its generals Akhmedov and other morons who hide secret positions from Solovyov, that in fact Gerasimov's geniuses, imagine he's a genius, could pull the Russian army through all those downsides they have only at such a level. So much so that in just a few years they could capture even 1% of Ukraine, having a mathematical advantage over practically the entire armament. And that if someone else does it instead, that minus will fall even harder. We'll see. But Gerasimov's absence is, of course, a quite important story from the point of view of Putin's formalism. If someone doesn't believe me when I say you don't need to sign a contract with the Russian army, otherwise you'll regret it later, then here. The same applies literally from the beginning, not from, let's say, the agent of MS-6 Mossad or the CIA or whoever I'm the agent for, but directly from the Russian troops. Putin, please listen, they want to write off my belly for spitting in they. Belly, they write everything's fine, that Godin is deceased. A 19-year-old soldier who signed a contract when he was 18 recorded a video message stating his critical health threats from the command. According to him, after a wounded in the combat zone and a seizure, he was denied operation. As a result, he constantly suffers. His leg is deformed and he doesn't fully flex the finger on the arm. Additionally, he has ulna and internal bleeding. The soldier said he escaped the hospital with other soldiers but later decided to go back himself. Well, they wanted to nullify me here, it turns out, cuts. Well, this finger doesn't fully flex at all, that's the topic. I ran from the hospital with ran and I decided to return back. Now they want to throw me in a pit. I became so unnecessary after the duck appeared. How is the health of the Russian Federation? Is the Putin president doing well? It hurts a lot. please help, the soldier said. The serviceman stated that doctors in command record him as fit for service despite being in good health and refuses to conduct an operation or be sent to the military-industrial complex. Now he is back in Sochi, but he intends to return, as he had previously been threatened with nullification for escape. At the same time, the boy understands that after his return, he could be sent to the pit and beaten. He doesn't even want to do the operation. They say what happens. In the beginning, I was about to leave. Now I'm taking a taxi back, going somewhere else. They throw me in the pit and start lying. They don't know what they're doing or how they planned it. What kind of law this is, I don't know. That's it, people, please help me. In his message, he directly turned to the president of the Russian Federation, asking him to intervene personally and helping him achieve the operation and medical examination. He's just a fool, 18 years, wrote a contract, now it's just hard. They said it would take 2 or 3 hours. They wanted to renew it. Well, that's how it is. You know, I don't sympathize with this person because I believe that anyone who signed up to kill Ukrainians for money is not worth my sympathy. Not that sympathy is a valuable thing, but it is to the people who are constantly undershelling in Ukraine, the killed families, the killed children, the kidnapped children being kidnapped by Russia, the Ukrainian torture, the torture that has passed, the torture that has just begun to defend its country. So of course I don't sympathize with this guy, but considering these 18, 19, 20-year-old people who I don't want to smell in life are now in tow, they have made the decision, they have decided to go kill for money. Now here, please, an 18-year-old man with a venomous belly, bloodshot leg and ass will obviously die in the next few weeks or in the coming days, or maybe he's already dead. Again, a question for those who support all of this. Are you sure you want this? Are you sure that if this happens, you are on the right side of the story? Are you sure, being a Russian soldier, I know many of you are watching this, you want to be in his place? Are you sure you want your loved one to be in his place? I think so. If you were waiting for some sign and were thinking, then here it is, a 19-year-old boy who signed the contract, 18. Here it is, this sign, it came to you through my video. And if you are in the Russian army, then it's time to run away. Give up Ukraine, want to live through the program, run away with the children of the forest, which will help you. Well, or your life will end very soon and it will be full. This will be your main memory of life, how you, gnawing to blood, sat in a pit, were beaten by your commanders. To not go to the Russian army at all, no matter what kind of beep, you believe, well, this is just a grave, this is just a death. More and more people understand this and stop supporting the Russian army, what is great. More and more people understand this and stop supporting the Russian army, what is great.
Действительно, хочется еще усилить этот эффект падения сборов, потому что чем больше российская армия собирает сборов, тем
more and more people understand this.
Возможности у российских военных воевать, поэтому в целом я под этим постом могу подписаться.
And stop supporting the Russian army, what is great.
И как вообще в голове у чувака это уживается, интересно? Ну, когда он пишет, что они цитируют наши посты, но это неправда. Так вы неправду пишете или что? Вы уж как-то решите. За сутки участвовало в сборе 455 человек, отвечают 2 майора, из 200 тысяч посмотревших пост со сбором. И это на нашем с вами большом канале, уважаемые читатели, пишут они.
If you consider at least your friends who you probably have, who aren't into frontline affairs, it's easy to count the percent of Russia's population helping frontline officers fighting for everyone. This is the mathematics behind the 2 majors for the 4th year of the war, the Z channels, unfortunately. And I add that the biggest damage to this so-called people's movement is made by these very early Z volunteers. To see this, watch my video about the so-called Z volunteer. Huge fan of expensive cars, Roman Alyakhin is on it. Fire in this scheme, by the way, I'm sure we'll go back to that topic in another video because things are just going well there, so yes, fundraising is down, and that's good. Russian corruption remains for another ally for Ukraine's allies, and they are already talking about the Russian military themselves. We cannot and will not remain silent about the mass crimes against the walls of our military unit, against the commander-in-chief, and under the direct command of Colonel Anatoly Nikolaevich Nikonov. This is not a matter of mistakes, it is about corruption, theft, and theft of government interests. Soldiers of the 1st Guards Mobile Brigade, the RKBZ, and Military Unit 71430 to approach the President of the Russian Federation, the Chairman of the Investigative Committee, and the Minister of Defense. According to them, an organized criminal group is operating in the military unit led by the Commander-in-Chief of Colonel Anatoly Grunov. At the age of 82, it is not about once violations, but about systematic thefts and abuse. Tattoo theft of state property is ongoing. Our soldiers are currently performing tasks for special military operations, and we, including in the military unit 7132, are organizing and operating a criminal group. According to them, on August 25, a criminal case was initiated. Article 160 of the GRU is related to the unit, particularly the commander of the Heavy Flamethrower Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Yablukov Alexander, deputy to the commander of the Senior Sergeant Zivat Yevgeny Loshchenkov, driver Yefret Raptov Vladimir, minor. Sergeant Maxim Izyumov, driver Abuzyar Ruslan. According to them, these people have been kidnapping for millions of rubles for years, supplying documents and using fake reports. They claim that the kidnapping did not stop after the incident. Servicemen also accused the deputies of the commander of the unit on the rear, Colonel Ivan Denis, of kidnapping products from the warehouse. According to them, the state awards and monetary payments for false schemes are practically provided. Among the individuals are the accused senior lieutenant, psychologist Chastia, who received a medal for his actions without participating in the fighting, as well as the senior officer, and don't list all their names, I'm brazen, and another officer who was fined for non-existent injuries. Additionally, the soldiers treated the head of the medical service, the major, with extortion when assigning wounds and payments. According to them, to cover the theft, the command uses attached acts with the name of the product, acts as if lost in the zone, thereby covering the theft. The man was told that the unit commander is given an expensive gift for covering the theft. All this system works under the command of Colonel Anatoly Nikolaevich Igorov. He purchases ammunition for covering this crime. For general confirmation, he was given an expensive gift during the checkup, for example, optical shells and so on. These shells match the ones lost in the SVO zone from fake documents. According to servicemen, the soldiers are under a threat for attempting to cut the crime, according to the unit commander and the battalion commander, Colonel Yablukov. Additionally, according to them, Vernov plans to attend the General Staff Academy to receive even more power. They consider this situation shameful and ask not to do so. We are confident that such leaders are not part of Russia's armed forces. They are an embarrassment for the honest officer corps. We do not discredit the army. These people are being discredited by the army. Servicemen demanded immediate check and acquisition of responsibility. They asked the chairman of the investigative committee, Bostrikin, for detailed investigation of the CIA's involvement. Soldiers also called on the media and public to pay attention to the situation and demanded a legal investigation. We call on the public and the patriotic media to pay attention to this situation. Silent is a tool to prevent theft. Damn, isn't it humiliating that the only media to say this is me? Well, not. Waiting for good news from a Telegram channel. Obviously, it's the media that stands against Russian aggression. But the media they address patriotic, they mean Z-patriots, who support the Ukraine capture and destruction, they won't say a word about it. In any case, let them say hello to Puzik, the evil Puzik, and to the investigation initiated by Defense Minister Belousov to investigate the death of Gudvin and Ernest, who also told about the criminal schemes in the unit. Good luck, guys. Most likely you will die soon and your own will destroy you. This is your choice. This is the army you're part of. But the military forces offer the Russians, using money, to change data in the military record so they don't end up under the supply line. In the Russian segment, a proposal has appeared to delete and record information in the military record. Verska found this out. Intermediates offer the Russians for several dozen thousand rubles to buy a non-cancelled category of value, change data in the personal card of the conscript, bypassing medical exams and the commission for visiting the military commissariat. As the sources explain, it works this way. Military commissaries with the right to report or change data in the conscript change the category of value in the personal card of the conscript, bypassing automatic filtration for sending signals. You're only getting FIO and your birth date, explains one of the conscripts. At the exit will be a photo and video from the base. There's all your data, your photos, and the fact that you were discharged from military service for health reasons. And you can call on a call, no one will call you anymore. Military lawyers warn of the risks of buying such a service, since the deceit can hide itself if the caller is called by the command of the military to specify the data. But this way is several times cheaper than buying a military ticket, close the key. And in principle, I don't see anything bad in this. True. That is, if this is really an active service, a guaranteed service, since Russia has automatized this whole process, it really should become cheaper, easier, and more reliable. So if you see such options, if you see them not too expensive, if you are ready to lose this money in the event of a deceit, then why not? The other thing is that if you are caught on this, then I would recommend it. I am not a lawyer, but nevertheless, to say that I don't know who changed anything from me, I have no access to this data. I did not ask anyone about anything, because if we talk about darknet, then most likely everything was in the crypt and no one will prove anything. Here, and do not change your data, that is, when you talk to the expatriates, tell them that, as it were, I am the one who is addressing you, the data of this person need to be changed, and transfer from some unverified cryptocurrency. This all sounds much more reliable than buying military tickets and logically the automatization of the process. I do not appeal to this. I will emphasize again, moreover, most of the proposals that exist are fake. They will just take the money and not do anything. But basically, if such an option exists, then I don't see anything bad in it. When we talk about corruption within the corrupt system that has already given its own constitution, this, in my opinion, is not a crime. Well, in other words, hiding the fact that there are Jews in your basement is not a crime. Chaining the category of your dignity so you don't go to a criminal war and don't kill people there is not a crime, because laws reflect morality. And if, in fact, the current laws and current actions of the state are immoral, then, in my opinion, these laws are not worth the paper on which they are written. Since Russia has disrupted its constitution, Russia and Vladimir Putin personally disrupt every day a specific article in the criminal code prohibiting the conduct of an aggressive war. It seems to me that the demands to provide this aggressive war have no legal reasons, and in the future, I think in the history of Russia, this will be then established. Well, maybe in another Nuremberg process. Well, Michael Nacke was with you and see you soon. All the best. Bye.